Hello, my name is Andrew Slater. I'm a risk management analyst for San Joaquin County Human Resources. This training is intended for managers, supervisors, and leads. Also, you should have watched the general heat illness training prior to this training. Due to social distancing guidelines and the COVID 19 pandemic, please follow Cal OSHA, Public Health Services, and CDC current guidelines in conjunction with heat illness prevention. This will impact the ability to take breaks, access to water, and other considerations. This training applies to volunteers, alternate work program individuals, part-time, full-time employees. First off, let's talk about the supervisor's responsibility. It's your responsibility as a supervisor, manager, or lead to provide access to water and shade. So providing access to water, that's 2 gallons per person per day. Now, if employees have a igloo container on site and they have the ability to refill that water, then we are meeting that requirement, and we'll talk about that water in more detail. Providing access to shade. In the previous training, we should have gone over the access to use our vehicles as rest and shade areas only if the AC is operational. So if an employee puts in a work order or brings to your attention that a vehicle's AC is not operational, let's get that addressed before they have to work in a high heat condition. Next, we'll talk about the National Weather Service, which is the only allowed weather service for monitoring the heat and the weather. And we'll talk about the written procedures, including your heat illness prevention plan, which is an appendix to your injury illness prevention plan. And we'll talk about the training, like the training we're doing today, and the training that you're going to need to do on tailgate sessions when it comes to those high heat weather days, which are 95-degree days. So the National Weather Service, again, this is the only allowed weather service that OSHA has designated as an authorized weather monitoring program. Again, so often we're tempted to view KCRA or use our Apple Watch or Apple phone or Google Weather. Can't use any of that. You need to use the National Weather Service. And you want to monitor the weather prior to the heat event taking place and communicate that to your employees. I see a lot of good departments out there. What they'll do is on the Friday before the heat event takes place, they go to the National Weather Service, they print out the weekly forecast, they tape it to their meeting room or their break room, and then each morning when they have their tailgate session before working in a high heat condition, they can go over the weather and their water, rest, shade provisions. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on those high heat days and the requirements that are associated with that. So access to water. Like I said earlier, that's 2 gallons per person per day. That can be accommodated with using igloo-style refillable containers. Just make sure that at the beginning of each workday that you designate. Someone needs to be designated as the person who will monitor the water to ensure the crew doesn't run out while they're working. If there's a 4-person crew, for example, then 8 gallons of water need to be accessible to the employees. The igloo-style containers are perfect mechanism for providing water to the employees. We want to ensure that the water is fresh, pure, and suitably cool. So let's talk about fresh, right? So we want to make sure that we're cleaning the igloo containers daily and not topping off the water with stagnant water on Friday, let it sit over the weekend, and then drink out of that Monday. No, we want to make sure it's cool. Now, it doesn't have to be ice cold water, as long as there's a temperature, an obvious temperature difference between the air temperature and the temperature of that water. We're meeting the requirement. Again, the only reason why we have this in 3395 in the legislation, in the regulation, is again bad employer making employees drink out of a Folgers coffee can or something that's a hot metal device that's radiating heat onto that water. That would not be good for anybody. So again, water. We want the water to be fresh, pure, and suitably cool. So access to water. We talked about that earlier through the igloo containers, whether it be igloos or drinking water within a building, break rooms, or if departments furnish their employees with miniature igloo containers that they can refill around the community, around their work site, or their buildings. That's providing access to water for the employee. So you want to locate the water containers as close as practical. Again, for instance, let's say we had a group of employees working on a county road, and the trucks are 100 yards away from the employees, but we have the ability to move those vehicles along with employees, we'd want to do that. We want to keep it as close as possible to them, so that way they have access to the water and access to shade and access to an area to have rest. And it's very interesting, within the standard of 3395, it actually states that supervisors will encourage the frequent drinking of water. And I always found this interesting. But what I love to hear is when I'm out doing these trainings around the county is when employees are coming up to me and they're saying, man, Andy, my supervisor will not be quiet about me drinking water. Every time I walk around, they're saying, drink water, drink water, drink water. That's the type of culture that we want to encourage here in San Joaquin County, where our management, our supervisors, our leads are developing this culture, encouraging employees to drink plenty of water, so that way we're meeting the requirements within the regulation. So shade up. Again, our trigger temperatures for the heat illness are at 80 degrees and high heat's at 95 degrees. So at 80 degrees, we must provide access to shade. You must provide enough shade to accommodate the number of employees on recovery or rest periods. Provide enough shade to accommodate the number of employees on meal periods or who remain on site. And remember, access to shade must be permitted at all times. So if you've established a temporary work zone, like we see in this picture here, we have someone do some HVAC work, maybe on a rooftop. So through administrative controls, you might want to make a decision to say, hey, let's do this work at 8 o'clock in the morning before it gets too hot. But in the real world, that's not how it happens. Emergencies happen. You could find yourself having to do the HVAC work on top of the building when it's 100 degrees out. And know that this job task is going to take 3 to 4 hours. We've established a work location. So do we have the ability to put water up there, to put an easy up tent up there, some type of shade structure to allow a cooling area for our employees while they work? So we want to monitor our employees on these cool down rests too. So if an employee comes to you and they say, hey, I'm not feeling well, I think I'm experiencing a heat-related illness, I'm feeling dizzy, I feel like I'm overheated, I need to take a break, you are officially put on notice. So the standard says that we have a minimum 5-minute break, but that please, we're not held to the 5 minutes. So at 5 minutes, the break's not over. It could be 5 minutes or longer, but it cannot be shorter than 5 minutes. So if an employee comes to you, they say, hey, I'm not feeling well, they put you on notice, we need to monitor those employees. The last thing you'd want to do is say, all right, hey, Bob, go have a seat over there in the shade. I'm going to lunch. I hope you feel better by the time I get back. Not acceptable. That's a violation of the standard. You are trained now to observe signs of heat-related illness. We need to monitor them to make sure that they're safe. And please note, if someone's abusing this or being insubordinate or trying to take advantage of the 5-minute break and obviously not experiencing any type of heat-related illnesses or injuries, contact Human Resources Risk Management and we'll help you address this issue. Shade. Shade shall be monitored and asked if he or she is experiencing symptoms of heat-related illness. Shall be encouraged to remain in the shade, shall not be ordered back to work until the signs or symptoms of heat-related illness have abated, but at no event less than 5 minutes, in addition to the time needed to access shade. So again, if someone's having to walk to the shade structure, we don't want to start the clock there and it's 30 seconds before they reach the shade. Let them get in the shade, 5 minutes, minimum. So after 2 minutes, they say, hey, Andy, I'm feeling well. I'm ready to go back to work. No. Please sit down. We want to do 5 minutes, and we'll talk in 5 minutes. And if they need more than 5 minutes, by all means, give more than 5 minutes. Now, if the temperature is below 80 degrees, does that mean we want to throw all this out of the window? Of course not. We still want to be proactive, and it's good for morale. So again, follow these provisions because if it is only 78 degrees that day, someone could still experience some heat-related illness. So again, be proactive. It's good for morale. But for the sake of the standard, Cal OSHA indicator numbers are 80 degrees and 95 degrees for high heat illness. So for high heat conditions, so this is our danger zone. This is when heat exhaustion, heat stroke are a big factor. And that's when temperatures are in excess of 95 degrees. Something that is very, very common in San Joaquin County to experience in these type of heat. So employees must have a means to contact their supervisors. We meet this requirement through radios or cell phones or working in groups of other employees. And during this time frame, supervisors must observe signs and symptoms of their employees if they're experiencing a heat-related illness. We must encourage the frequent drinking of water. So we don't want to make it a punishment. We don't want to take away water from employees ever. We want to constantly encourage it. And again, monitor those new employees again during the first 14 days of employment. So we, again, 95 degrees, we want to make sure we implement additional procedures to make sure we have communication with our employees. And this is especially important for what we would call like a lone worker, right? Someone who's out doing a survey, working by themselves, high heat conditions, experiencing heat-related illness, and they have no way of calling for help or 911. That's something we don't want to have happen. So we meet that requirement through giving radios, phones, or having a buddy system. And again, for the sake of the county, I don't think we experienced in this problem, but the regulation states that you must have one supervisor for every 20 employees. So if you ever find yourself in that situation where you have more than 20 employees working out in direct sunlight, working in high heat conditions, that's when we're going to have to implement additional supervisors. Regular communication through electric means, again, we'll meet that requirement through radios and cell phones. It's all about communication. Again, we don't want to have that lone worker working by themselves, experiencing a heat-related illness, and they get injured. So on those 95-degree days, we want to have that pre-shift meeting. So that's your tailgate sessions. As was discussed earlier in the general heat illness prevention training, that means we are visiting the National Weather Service, we're printing out the weekly report for the temperatures, and trying to use those administrative controls. If we can get work done in the morning before this high heat event takes place, let's do that. But if we're going to be working out in high heat, we need to have that discussion about water, rest, and shade, and specifically how do you implement that, right? We can't talk generically about it. We need to talk about specifics. How does that work site within that department, that division, addressing water, rest, and shade through your policies and procedures? So you want to go over that. We want to document attendance. We want to identify who the leads are that day, who's going to be checking the water quantity to make sure we don't run out of water, and who's going to be refilling it. And remember, on those high heat conditions, we want to require employees are provided a 10-minute cool down period, rest period every 2 hours. So written procedures, make sure you review your department's heat illness prevention policy. That's going to be usually an appendix of your injury illness prevention program. If you're unsure where to find this, have a conversation with your department safety and health rep, your DSHR, who is your liaison between your department and risk management. They can give you more information in regards to your heat illness prevention plan. So every plan is developed to incorporate the requirements through Cal OSHA. It's specific, it's readily accessible, and must be included within your emergency response. So you want to have your heat illness prevention plan kind of joined in with your emergency action plan so we know how to render that first aid to employees and call emergency services if needed. So emergency procedures, provide treatment for affected employees. How do you contact emergency medical services? Where are we going to move the victim to get transported? Again, a great example for this would be a big facility that's not necessarily open to the public, which would be things like our landfills, our transfer stations. We have an employee who gets injured at North County recycling facility. We would need to communicate to first responders where they're going to find the victim, who's going to let them into the work zone. How is that communication going to be done? So that needs to be articulated within your emergency action plan, your heat illness plan, and your standard operating procedures. Training. So we want to ensure all employees are trained the Cal OSHA standard, and that's what we're doing today with the training that we're doing. And along with those training, those tailgate sessions that we're doing within our 95 high heat condition days, again, meeting those training requirements. So if you wanted to learn more information, you could visit the Cal OSHA website, www.99calor.org. And on there, there's all sorts of free publications, flyers, handout, tailgate sessions, things that you could use for heat safety tips. Now, as a safety professional, I never believe in policing safety, but I do believe in learning opportunities. And there's one learning opportunity I always like to share because it has a local impact associated with it. A few years ago in Acampo, there was a field worker named Maria Jimenez who was working in a field who began experiencing a heat-related illness, and she told her supervisor, "Hey, I think I'm experiencing heat illness. I'm not feeling well." Supervisor told her, "Get back out in the field, get to work." She later passed out, was transported to the hospital, where she died a few days later, and her unborn child had also passed away due to a heat-related illness. So The supervisors, the foreman, the CEO of the company were levied charges against, including 1 felony and 5 misdemeanors for violating state labor code. So again, goes to be that saying: if you're a manager, you're a safety professional, you're overseeing someone's safety, and you knowingly, willfully put them in dangerous situations, you could find yourself up in a courtroom, because remember, anything can get litigated. But let's learn from this as safety professionals and as supervisors, that we want to create a safe work environment for our employees. So again, it's our goal that everybody goes home safe at the end of the day. Thank you so much for taking this training. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to Lolita Pearson, the County Safety Officer, or myself, Andy Slater, Risk Management Analyst, and our phone numbers are listed there. Thank you and have a safe day.